Hello, my name is Sandra Fecht. Today is October the 7th. It's a Friday, 2016, and I want to welcome you to a conference From Illusion to Reality, and you can learn a little more about this conference at illusiontoreality.com. My email address is Sandra, S-A-N-D-R-A, Fecht, F-E-C-H-T, @rogers.com. I have been a counsellor in Ontario for many years. I was trained originally in the usual methods, and I didn't believe there was anything like sexual abuse, or certainly not satanic ritual abuse. I went through a very lengthy opening when I realized there was sexual abuse, and even more so when I realized there was satanic abuse. We are all raised in a certain kind of denial. We have denial about ourselves, we have denial about our parents, and we have denial about the society. Some part of us always wants to think everything is wonderful, and for some of us life truly is wonderful. However, there are other things going on beneath the surface. I started doing counseling, and in order to help people who had been sexually abused, I developed methods for going deeper and deeper, because they didn't always remember what had happened to them. And I realized that the most powerful part was the part they had repressed. We'll deal more with that in a moment. I will warn you that the next 5 minutes or so are going to be very difficult to hear. So I would ask that people who have children, that the children be removed from the room, that I want to warn you that this may be triggering. And if this is very, very difficult for you and causes a bad reaction in you, you may want to ask yourselves why. When I developed these methods of helping people to uncover what had happened to them, I started to hear very bad stories. There were things like hoods and chanting, strange things that I had never heard of before. And I will tell you that what I'm going to tell you in the next 2 or 3 minutes, it took me years and years to believe and pay attention to. I originally thought the people who told me these things were really very crazy. And having had a lot of training in the medical model, I sent them back to their doctors for medication, and often they were put into a psychiatric hospital. But they talked about drugging, being drugged, being raped, multiple rapes, sex, and you'll pardon me for this, but this is what we're here to talk about, sex with animals, sodomy, going a little deeper, sacrifice of children. I knew nothing of women being used to breed children for use as sacrifice. There was the eating of body parts and other really gross, horrible things, the drinking of blood. There were reports of extreme cruelty, acts of cruelty that you can't even imagine. And I heard from some of my clients that these acts of cruelty, there were local, regional, provincial, national, and international contests where they would reward those who could be this cruel. Normally in good families, we reward people for being kind and gentle and honest. In the families that are involved with this kind of thing, they reward their children for being cruel and deceitful and knowing how to extend torture. And if you have a difficult time believing any of this, I totally understand it. It took me many years to believe this. I further heard stories of lizard beings. Whether they were etheric or whether they were physical, I heard these stories of curses and demons and things that you would think people only believed in the Middle Ages. But I know now that that these are true. The tortures included things like putting people in boxes with spiders or snakes or rodents. They included things that had to do with the elements, like burning people, especially in places where they wouldn't show, like their mouths or the soles of their feet, which can produce a lot of pain without leaving any scars. Waterboarding, burying in the earth, being hurt with metal or wood objects. There were just all kinds of obscene and horrific acts designed to terrify people. I used to wonder, why would they do this? Now I know, and I'll be explaining it a little longer in a few minutes. You need convincers when you hear these types of stories, especially when you haven't heard anything like this before, and no one around you has heard anything about it. For the longest time, I thought these people were very crazy, and as I said, I sent them away to get medicated and be hospitalized. But after a while, I realized they can't all be telling me these stories, and they're all wrong. Someone has to be right here. So I decided that what would convince me that these stories were true. And I came up with 5 ways of being convinced that these stories were true. One is if there was scientific evidence or some kind of proof. And I did have clients who were left boxes of paraphernalia that had been used in ceremonies, or who had scars or other things that would indicate they had been hurt. The Bible refers to these kinds of things. And if you read your Bible closely enough, you will find it there. At one point in the Bible in Leviticus, it says, "Do not wear cloth of mixed fiber." And I used to think, what does that have to do with anything? But now I realize that if you wear cloth of mixed fiber, every cloth has a different frequency. And in the end, it comes down to, what's the frequency? Getting back to the convincers, if other cultures also report these stories, then I believe there's truth to it. Everywhere you see reference to dragons and lizards. And I know that in the birch bark scrolls of some of the native people of Ontario, there are reports of the lizards who came across Ontario and hurt the people there. If I've had my own experience with things, then I believe it. And on at least 2 or 3 occasions, I have watched people morph into something that was not human. And it's a very chilling experience when that, literally as well as psychologically. On one occasion, the temperature in the room really dropped. And as well as the person changing in the way they sounded and the way they looked, there was a lot of fear generated in the room by people who would normally not be afraid. So my experience tells me, if a client has repeated something a great many times, like if I've heard it from a dozen clients, I have to believe there's some truth to it. The thing that really convinced me is that I received a death threat from someone, and in fact I've had a couple of death threats, and I reported it to the police. And at a time when I knew nothing of satanic symbols, the building I was working out of was spray painted with symbols that someone had to tell me were satanic. At some point, I had a young police officer. I made 3 reports, and the police officer came to me and said, "Sandra, you need to know that all your police reports are disappearing." So I knew at that point there was truth to this, and I started to really listen to the people. I would seriously urge anyone who is in any healing or legal capacity whatsoever to please listen to these stories and to get yourself educated as much as possible, because as weird and phenomenal as they sound, they are true. Who does this? Well, there are different groups. There are military and political, high-tech, and believe it or not, alien, ancient, men's clubs, and there are splinter groups. The military and political, I've heard people tell me how they knew how to operate weapons that they had never picked up consciously. And they had been trained in things that they didn't know how to do. I've had at least 3 ordinary, lovely young women or older women tell me that they knew that on a certain frequency that they would go out and kill people. It's kind of disconcerting when your local bookkeeper tells you that. The high-tech and alien groups, I was told by a Secret Service person that they're 1,000 years ahead of us in terms of technology. And they can do things like create portals to get people from A to B. They can do time travel. So I've had many, many people tell me they've had weeks and weeks of weapons training. And I said, well, how would that happen? You know, surely someone would have noticed that you were missing. And they've told me they stepped into this room or box. Instantly they were somewhere else. They went through these 2 or 3 weeks of training, came back, and it was like 2 minutes later in terms of usual time. So there are things that they can do that we have no information about. And if you look around, you can see that those who are part of this system know things and know about things that the rest of us don't know about. The ancient groups can use seeds, plants, rhythms, chants, tones, and so on, in order to create a specific frequency effect on other people. And I used to think, why do they spend so much time chanting? Like, what's that all about? And I realize now that 2 things are achieved with the chant. One is that they get you into a certain frequency, and the other is if they're torturing you while they're chanting, that your entire energetic field will collapse, and that's really what they're after. There are men's clubs, and I'm sure in your own mind you can think of a few men's clubs where these things go on. And I don't want to imply that everyone in the military or the high-tech or the ancient things are all bad, or the men's clubs, because I know there are good and bad on both sides of this. There are people who know how to use these things for good. I do want to refer back to the alien thing for a moment. A former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Hellyer, who was 92 years old, went and addressed the United Nations and goes around the world speaking. And he said that it isn't whether or not the aliens are here. The aliens are here. It's a question of government transparency. And what we should all be pushing our governments for is to fess up to this and to admit to the people that there really are aliens on the earth. And if you look in the Bible, in Genesis 6, it refers to the sons of the gods lusting after the daughters of men. And so there's biblical evidence for that, as well as the huge skulls that have been found in Peru and other places. If you look, you find the evidence, and it would behoove everyone to do the search. There are splinter groups and people who do very strange things, but they don't understand the power that some of these higher level groups understand. There's also repression. Part of the problem here is that people do not always remember what has happened to them. There are many reasons for that. One is that oftentimes people have been drugged. And Dave, who will be talking a little later, was drugged for most of his life. He had no memory of any of this. In extreme trauma, the brain secretes cortisol. And what happens when you secrete cortisol is that you don't remember the part of the action that was too difficult. So if people go through a very bad accident or something and it was too difficult for them to process, they just won't remember that part. The problem is that part always leaves a calling card, and the calling card is a symptom. So what would the symptom be? It might be that you can't get along with other people, maybe you sexually act out or feel sexually inhibited. You might have a mood disorder, you may have a physical problem. There could be 100 different kinds of symptoms, but if there's some symptom that you are not able to deal with, you might want to look at a little deeper level. What is the purpose of all of this and the history? Well, in my view, the purpose of it all is to gain souls, energy, and your gifts. Someone told me once that it was his job to gather the energy from the tortured people. That when they were tortured enough, they started to dissociate, and the energy came out of their bodies. And his gift was that he could take that energy. He could take the energy and direct it to somebody else. So I've also, in working with people, realized that there are traps right up until the moment of death. So I really and strongly urge everyone to get a faith. For me, I'm a Christian. That's what works for me. I would urge everyone to really get back that connection with the invisibles, with the unseen. There is a spectrum of energy that goes from very heavy, dense, dark energy to very light. And you want to be sure that you're looking in the right direction and that you get that very light energy. So it's a battle for energy and for souls. The history of it is that, and I think it even precedes the burning of the library in Alexandria, that those in the know want to keep the esoteric information, the specialized information, from the rest of us, because that is the way they control us. And when I look at the European history, there's a book called Witchcraft, and they say that between 3 and 9 million women, mostly women, were murdered, burned at the stake for knowing this information. I swear there's a genetic memory in us that makes us afraid to really reach out and grab our beautiful true essence. Because if we talk of energy, if we talk of spirit directly, then there's some memory that says maybe we will be hurt. But I think it's the opposite. If we don't recognize it, if we don't talk about it, then we're going to be hurt. So we have to reclaim that part of our history. Not only were the Europeans hurt, but everywhere that European imperialism went around the world, the incident of spiritual events went down. Traditionally around the world, there were shamans who could bilocate, heal, travel distances, do all these amazing spiritual acts. We went to these places as Europeans. We killed those who knew how to do this. We took a copy of whatever information they had, and we burned the other copies. Where did the copies go? They went to the Vatican. Are we informed by our churches of how to be magnificently spiritual? No. There's an intermediary, the priest, and if you pay enough and do enough, maybe your soul can get to heaven. But the example of Christ on crucifixion was that the veil was rent, and the veil in the tabernacle, when it was rent, allowed us to access God directly. We each have to rent our own veil. We each have to access God directly so that we can have a direct experience with this divine. So, all around the world, all through time, we have tried to stop people, the Europeans, and I know they're good Europeans, I'm one of them. The Europeans who did these things, however, tried to stop us from knowing our true glory and our true selves. So, realizing all of this, what do my methods include? Well, firstly, I realized that all of this torture and so on, all of these disgusting acts, were designed to keep us in shame and fear and disgust and guilt, anger, desire, all of the negative emotions. Why? Because that's what they want. They feed on negative emotions. They want you down there. Once you reach a certain level of consciousness, you can claim your true inheritance, the real value and beauty of who you are. If you read a book by Dr. David Hawkins called Power versus Force, he has in the back of in the page in his book a level of consciousness scale. Really, honestly, that is what life is about, is however you do it, raise your level of consciousness. So my methods include things like teaching people, firstly, that this is out there, and that you have an energy field. So here's a picture of you and your energy field. We know that laser lights do things, you know, they contain information and they influence people. You have an energetic field all around you. You swim in an energy soup. It's filled with information. It needs cleaning, just like your teeth, your hair, your body. And I have a small manual that describes how to do this. Shamans all over the world know how to do this. So depending on what's in your energy field, there's something called Kirlian photography, and Kirlian photography will take a picture of it so you can actually see what your energetic field looks like, and it gives information about you. There's an assemblage point, and the energy first comes into your body through the assemblage point. There's a fellow called John Whale in England who has developed, he's an engineer, and he has developed equipment to test the location and the efficiency of your assemblage point. And his name is W-H-A-L-E. If the assemblage point is too low, you get depressed and sluggish and certain illnesses like chronic fatigue. If it's too high, you get high blood pressure and anxiety. And depending on the location, it will impact your health, your thoughts, and so on. The energy comes in through the various 7 chakras. You can learn about the chakras through the INEH group, I-N-E-H, the Independent or International Network of Energy Healers.org, I think it is. Every one of these has specific functions for how you think, how you feel, what your body does, the health of your body. And you need to learn how to balance this all over the world. Shamans knew what these did, the impact on your body. If I said to you, run this hotel, run your house without hydro, what would happen? Would it not fall apart? You'd have no light, no refrigerator, no heat, no TV. And the house would be a mess. And it's the same with your body. From here, the energy goes from the chakras, it goes into meridians. Ayurvedic and healing from India deals largely with the chakras. In China, they deal with meridians. All shiatsu, acupuncture, and so on deals with meridians. I teach people how to balance their energetic field, first of all, because if a client comes to me and they're calm and loving and happy and relaxed, they're going to be a lot easier to work with. Then I put them into an alpha state to retrieve the information they need. There are 4 main brainwave states. Beta, which is, I hope, what you're all doing now, all being awake and alert and listening. Alpha, which is when you have your eyes closed and you can access the unconscious better in alpha. And some people say that when you first meet somebody, you should go into that state because you really absorb it better, absorb the information. There is theta, which is a deep hypnosis, and delta, which is sleep. Well, in beta, theta, and delta, you don't remember what you've done and you have no control over it. But in alpha brainwaves are the sweet spot. And in alpha, you can keep control of yourself, you can remember what has happened to you, and you can access the information in the unconscious, which is what we want to do. We want to find out those parts of your trauma that were too difficult for you to process at the time and left you with symptoms, which is what we're looking to deal with. So there are general methods of trauma, but a little later on, Fran will be working or talking about the methods that we found that the higher level Satanists and high-tech people do specifically to our energetic field. And while you may think, well, the only people whose energy field is being interfered with are those who have been through trauma or these rituals and so on, that isn't true. What Fran will be talking about is very specific, but we have all generally been affected by what's going on under the, like that's hidden in our society. Once we have found the energy glitch, then we can find the triggers and the programs. If I am perfectly energetically balanced, I can walk through life with joy, with love, with hope and peace, healthy body, calm mind, balanced emotions. Life feels great. Most of us don't walk through life that way. How many people do you know who wake up in the morning just filled with the joy of life? Right, yeah. It's the truth, you know, but we should, and we can set our lives up to do that. What we have to realize is that what's going on affects everybody. How many of us think our food delivery system and our food growing system is perfect? That we are getting the healthiest, most economical food possible? Nobody believes that these days because we all know that there are so many additives and so on. That it's grown in poor soil, that we have pesticides and fertilizers that are neurotoxins that really affect us. How many of us believe that the powers that be control the economy in our favor? Yeah, that's the usual response. The economy is not being controlled in our favor. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. This affects everyone. How many of you think the pharmaceutical companies are out there day and night looking for cures? No? Yeah, I don't believe it either. The cancer industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it seems to me that someone could have found something by now. The entertainment industry, is it designed to lead us up or down? You know, you look at it, does it take us to a higher moral ground, more wisdom, more truth, more love? Or does it lead us down into those lower levels? The music industry, and I'm sure most of you have heard of the 432 hertz and the 440 hertz. The 432 hertz, Verdi's A, it's called, brings sanity to your mind, calm to your emotions, health to your body, harmony between people. But starting around the 1930s, there's something called German tuning, or now called standard tuning, which is 440 hertz. They say John Lennon was killed for this because he was trying to promote the 432 hertz. 440 hertz, which is now called standard tuning, brings chaos to the mind, confusion to the feelings, ill health, and disruption, like conflict between. Almost all the music these days is in 440 hertz. It would behoove you, if your children are taking piano lessons, to really take a look at the tuning of the piano. So, then we have the education system. The education system. How many of you think that what's happening to the education of our children is ultimately for their good? I know there are good teachers out there. I know there are good doctors. People who are really trying against all odds to help others. But the whole system is designed not to bring out the best. Education, the word comes from the word educere in Latin, to bring forth that which is within that person. What we tend to do is stuff information into them rather than letting them find who they are. We no longer have appropriate rituals to let our young people know that they're emerging into adulthood. Maybe driving a car, maybe having sex, maybe drinking. Okay? The whole morality issue. Every time you have sex with somebody, you change energy fields and you lose part of yourself. So there's a swaying thing that I have developed, and it can get your energetics back. The wars that we experience, they always give us some reason for why there's a war, but mostly it's internationally sanctioned ritual abuse. The other thing is that they're in there for reasons other than what they say they're in there for. The information system, do you believe the news? Do you believe the news? No? No, I think we get what they want us to know. There are good people, but there's something wrong with the system. And again, getting back to the spiritual part of it, our churches have been compromised. There really are spirits out there, both good and bad. Okay? And it would behoove you to really look into what benefits you, what benefits your soul. And that is your entire responsibility on this earth, to keep your energetics balanced, to know how to do that, and to keep your soul in a good way. So, given the enormity of all this, this is huge when you finally step out of your denial and you realize what's going on. What can you do? Well, some of it, I know that many of us don't have a lot of money, but we can monitor our thoughts. We can monitor our thoughts. We can get into an attitude of gratitude, just appreciating the sunrise and the sunset. Taking deep breaths and breathing properly. You can look at your thoughts, your words, and your deeds and maintain a loving, calm, peaceful attitude as much as possible. Be kind to others. Develop a faith. Meditate every day. It will literally change the grooves in your brain. Eat as well as you possibly can. Step back from things like potato chips and all of the Coke. Coke is, not great. Aspartame, all of the neurotoxins that are the sugar substitutes, and sugar itself. They're not good for you. Exercise, get lots of sunshine, stay informed. With the internet these days, there's no reason why we can't spend some time researching this instead of watching the circus of comedy shows. And I hate to say it, my husband's a sports person, but the sports, sorry honey. Do your energy balancing. Learn about energy balancing as much as possible. Get yourself a manual. There are all kinds of different ones out there. I have one. And learn how to do the simple techniques that will keep your energy balanced. Recognize that if you are feeling great and then suddenly your energy turns off, that you've been triggered. It's a signal from your unconscious that you have something to deal with. The other thing is, this is not about war. It is not about getting angry and so on. It's about walking in a sacred way. When I was a kid, I was in a race, and what they did was give us a spoonful of Rice Krispies. And we had to go as fast as we could to the end of the race and keep the Rice Krispies in the spoon. Well, some people started out so quickly that all the Rice Krispies flew out of the spoon. And some people paid so much attention to the Rice Krispies that they lost the race. What you have to do is keep your eye on yourself. This is the Rice Krispies, this is my soul, this is my energy balance, and still walk in such a way that you do well in this world, okay? So it's Rice Krispies, spoon, speed. Rice Krispies, spoon, speed. I really enjoy quoting Viktor Frankl. I don't know if anybody knows who he was, but he was a fellow, he was a young Jewish guy that was taken to the concentration camps during the Second World War. And one by one, every single member of his family died. You know, they were raped, starved, frozen, beaten, gassed, shot, whatever, but every single member of his family died. And he, understandably, started to hate. What level of consciousness is hate? It's a very low level of consciousness. And one day he realized, if I hate, I become one of them. Hate, anger, aggression, these are the weapons of the other side. These are not the things of those of us who walk in truth, beauty, faith, and light. We need to walk in love, understanding, and forgiveness, and keep our energy field balanced in that way. And I know this was a very short introduction to the work, but I hope it piques your interest. I hope I hear from some of you. We do give workshops on this to fill it out in more detail. You will be hearing from Dave about his experience in terms of being raised in one of these families, and from Fran, who will go into more detail about some of the energetic damage that is done and how they can control us with frequency. Thanks for your attention, and God bless. Hello, my name is Sandra Fecht. Today is October the 7th. It's a Friday, 2016. And I want to welcome you to a conference from illusion to reality, and you can learn a little more about this conference at illusiontoreality.com. My email address is Sandra, S-A-N-D-R-A, Fecht, F-E-C-H-T, @rogers.com. I have been a counselor in Ontario for many years. I was trained originally in the usual methods, and I didn't believe there was anything like sexual abuse, or certainly not satanic ritual abuse. I went through a very lengthy opening when I realized there was sexual abuse. And 5 minutes or so are going to be very difficult to hear. So I would ask that people who have children, that the children be removed from the room, that I want to warn you that this may be triggering. And if this is very, very difficult for you and causes a bad reaction in you, you may want to ask yourselves why. When I developed these methods of helping people to uncover what had happened to them, I started to hear very bad stories. There were things like hoods and chanting, you know, strange things that I had never heard of before. And I will tell you that what I'm going to tell you in the next 2 or 3 minutes, it took me years and years to believe and pay attention to. I originally thought acts of cruelty that you can't even imagine. And I heard from some of my clients that these acts of cruelty, there were local, regional, provincial, national, and international contests where they would reward those who could be this cruel. You know, normally in good families we reward people for being kind and gentle and honest. In the families that are involved with this kind of thing, they reward their children for being cruel and deceitful and knowing how to extend torture. And if you have a difficult time believing any of this, I totally understand it. It took me many years to believe this. I further heard stories of lizard beings. The people who told me these things were really very crazy. And having had a lot of training in the medical model, I sent them back to their doctors for medication, and often they were put into a psychiatric hospital. But they talked about drugging, being drugged, being raped, multiple rapes, sex, and you'll pardon me for this, but this is what we're here to talk about, sex with animals, sodomy, going a little deeper, sacrifice of children. I knew nothing of women being used to breed children for use as sacrifice. There was the eating of body parts and other really gross, horrible things, the drinking of blood. There were reports of extreme cruelty, and even more so when I realized there was satanic abuse. We are all raised in a certain kind of denial. We have denial about ourselves, we have denial about our parents, and we have denial about the society. Some part of us always wants to think everything is wonderful, and for some of us life truly is wonderful. However, there are other things going on beneath the surface. I started doing counseling, and in order to help people who had been sexually abused, I developed methods for going deeper and deeper, because they didn't always remember what had happened to them. And I realized that the most powerful part was the part they had repressed. We'll deal more with that in a moment. I will warn you that the next